2 years ago, I went to a Christian Apologetics conference in Worcester, Massachusetts, figuring it would be an ideal setting in which to find knowledgeable Christians willing to talk to me about the truth or falsity of Christianity. You would think. But no, I couldn't get anyone to talk to me on the record. It confirmed to me what I read somewhere, that Christian apologetics exists more to bolster the faith of believers than to defend the faith against outsiders. Then, this October, there was another such conference in Middleborough, Massachusetts, put on by the same organization, a noted Bible college in California, Biola University, which flies their people around the country to present these apologetics conferences. Same thing. I couldn't get anyone to talk to me on the record. No one was willing to have a discussion recorded, which to me is the proper way to debate Christianity. Number one, to make sure the actual words, context, and attitudes are conveyed accurately. And number two, to get the issues on the table so that people other than the two people conversing can listen to and benefit from the discussion and make up their own minds. And so, instead of a recorded sit-down debate with a Christian, I'm reduced to presenting here scripted dialogues based on my extensive notes on what was said between me and the handful of Christians who engaged with me off the record. And of course I'm going to distort what they said. I'm going to make up some stuff, I'll leave out some of their good points, I'll push my own biased agenda no matter what. Or, as a matter of honor, I will present their arguments as fairly as I can, yet express my perspective on the issues.
You realize that the Bible has more authenticated manuscripts than any other piece of ancient literature.
Oh yeah, I know that, but that doesn't mean that what it says is true. For example, if absolute proof was found that a blind man named Homer wrote the Odyssey, that wouldn't mean that what he wrote was true, that a giant one-eyed cyclops existed. I think the Dead Sea Scrolls do authenticate the Bible as literature from that period of time, but not at all that what it says is true.
There were 500 witnesses to the resurrected Jesus.
One person claiming 500 witnesses is not the same thing as 500 separate witnesses. I could say, my great-great-grandfather was resurrected. You wouldn't believe me. But if I say then, oh, and there were 500 witnesses, would you then believe me? No. That's just one man claiming 500, not 500. And you know, the Book of Mormon, at the beginning of the book, has the sworn testimony of 11 real people, specific people from the 1800s. You can find actual photographs of some of them, legally swearing that they saw Joseph Smith with the golden plates. But you don't accept the Book of Mormon as true, do you?
No.
The biggest problem I have with Christian theology is hell. I think it's insane to think that a God who tortures anyone, no matter how bad they were, forever, without end, is a God worthy of worship.
Well, the thing is, you're assuming a just world.
I think his point was that the world is not just. There are evil people in the world, and they need to be held accountable for their evil. Therefore, hell is reasonable. I think that was his point. Well, no, I know the world is not just, but whether the world is just or not is not the issue. The issue is whether God is ultimately just or not. And torturing people forever is not just or loving. It's insanely cruel. Hazen's talk was titled, "What in the World Are We Afraid Of?" He painted the challenges and questions from secularists as pretty weak and nothing to be afraid of. Well, I think my arguments against Christianity are much stronger than the ones he mentioned in his talk. Later on, I tried to get him to agree to sit down with me. He was not interested. In his mind, because I was only interested in advancing my anti-Christian agenda. In my mind, because he was afraid of valid arguments from a knowledgeable ex-Christian compared to the weaker arguments from callow college students. He didn't make much eye contact with me and suggested I talk to others.
You have an agenda.
Yeah, I have an agenda. I want to show how your religion is wrong and that it's harmful.
Harmful? How is it harmful?
You discriminate against gay people.
I have gay friends. How can that be discrimination?
You think they're going to hell.
How is that discrimination? We're still friends. We treat them with love.
But you make them feel guilty, like they're at their core horrible people who deserve severe punishment.
We disagree about a moral issue. That does not mean we can't sit down and be friends.
I'm not saying that one cannot be kind to someone you think is being profoundly immoral, but I'm saying it's almost impossible to be friends with such a person. The issue needs to be resolved. Either the person has to stop being immoral, or you have to realize he or she is not being immoral. Otherwise, the issue will always fester and cause harm. One side suffers believing their friend is being immoral, and the other side suffers knowing they are not accepted for who they are. See, you're just ignoring the issue. If you had a son or daughter who was gay, you don't think it's going to have a tremendously harmful effect on them? That you think they're being profoundly immoral?
Disapproval does not mean we can't love the person.
If you disapprove of what a person honestly knows who they are at their core, that's not loving them.
Nicholas, you're a confused person.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, you are.
No, I'm not. I think you live in a bubble.
I have no interest in having my off-the-cuff answers to planned questions edited and then put on the internet. I don't want to talk to you. It wouldn't do any good. And besides, you have a reputation.
A reputation? A reputation that I'm not going to be fair, that I'm going to somehow engineer an uneven playing field? Well, let me give you my perspective here, and I'll be specific. I'm pretty sure this person, as well as several of the other Biola people, know that I had a sit-down with William Lane Craig, their best apologist, back in 2015, and that I had posted our discussion going back on my agreement not to post it. I had asked Craig if I could audio record the conversation so that I can get things down accurately and also so not to have to take notes as we conversed. He agreed, but specified that he didn't want it posted online. I agreed mainly because I knew he would not talk to me if I intended to post it. I figured, okay, he doesn't know me, he doesn't know if I would turn out to be fair or not, or present something out of context or whatever. But after our conversation, I felt now he knows I'm making sincere arguments, and that while disagreeing with him, I'm not distorting or misrepresenting his positions. Yet he still did not want the conversation posted, despite the fact that the issues we discussed are the very issues that have caused many Christians to leave the faith, and these were his answers to the issues. Why in the world would he not want it posted? I could see no valid reason for not at this point wanting it posted. I think the real reason he didn't want it posted is that he knows my arguments are strong and might cause Christians to doubt their faith. Do you mean to tell me that if the conversation had gone differently and I had actually converted and accepted Jesus by the end of the conversation, that he would not have been more than delighted to have me post the conversation? No, he just knows that Christianity did not come off as well as he had hoped against the valid arguments of a knowledgeable ex-Christian. I ended up posting not our actual conversation, but my point-by-point assessment of it. And then Christian commenters complained that they'd like to hear the actual conversation, not my biased presentation of it. At any rate, a few years later, in 2019, I saw Craig in an interview repeating the same dishonest defense of slavery in the Bible that he gave me, that biblical slavery wasn't really slavery, but indentured servitude. I was so upset at his dishonesty on this point, I decided I don't care. I'm going to post the actual conversation now. It is a greater good to post it, a good that trumps my coerced agreement not to post it. Obviously, I don't have the same stature as Galileo, but I think my situation is very analogous. The Church agreed to let Galileo continue his experiments on heliocentrism on the condition he not publish the results. He agreed he would not, but then he published them anyway. He did it for the greater good, for the truth, even though he went back on his coerced word. He was not the bad guy, the Church was. Likewise, I'm not the bad guy who went back on his word. Craig is the bad guy for not wanting valid criticisms of Christianity to be presented publicly. For Christians who scoff and say Craig has been quite public in his positions, these Christians should note that he most often debates the existence of God with atheists, a somewhat nebulous exercise, rather than debates Christianity itself with ex-Christians, a more definitive exercise. At the conference, I felt bad that some of the people I talked to had administrative things to do and were under that pressure trying to talk to me while knowing there were other things they had to do. But that is exactly why I kept pushing for a comfortable sit-down at a later time with no such pressure, when we can pursue issues fully instead of just exchanging quick talking points. One of my most satisfying informal debates was with Peter Kraft, a Catholic apologist, because he was willing to meet with me weekly over a 2-month period. We were able to pursue issues all the way through, continuing topics from the previous week, taking them as far as we could, inevitably agreeing to disagree, and only then moving on to the next topic. I offered to let people here have the last word at the end of the conversation. I offered them a final word on whatever I post, with no further comment from me. I offered to post our conversation as is, with no editing or commentary whatsoever. I offered them an immediate copy of what was recorded, and they could post it with whatever commentary they want, under their perspective. But no, they would not agree. I mentioned my experience in posting a video about Noah's Ark. The staff people there at the Ark Encounter did not think I was unfair. I thought Moreland offered a decent answer to the difficult general question of what is truth. He said truth is a matching between thought or assertion and reality. That was good. But the rest of his talk was on miracle claims and the reality of angels and demons. He mentioned a demon-possessed person who was able to say specific things about other people, things he could not possibly have known without the supernatural knowledge of the demon. I rolled my eyes. I can't take that stuff seriously. I know how easily con artists in the psychic world fool people with their clever tricks. He also talked a lot about answered prayer. I'm going to play a clip on Moreland from an atheist podcaster named Pine Creek. Pine Creek is a former Christian, and I find his insights on the Christian mindset to be very perceptive. I agree with him on virtually everything. Here is the pool table prayer.
What the girls said, my daughter said, yeah, we need a pool table because guys, they love playing pool and we'd like to play pool. And I said, you know what?
No.
I can't afford a pool table. And if you want one, we're just going to have to ask God for it. So,
No.
So we held hands as a family, my wife, me, and both my daughters, who still remember this.
No. Don't tell me you prayed for money to buy a pool table and there's people dying of cancer. Don't go there.
Shut up. Ooh.
Please don't. Please tell me you're not going here.
Now that they're grown and married themselves. And we asked God to give us a really good pool table, just like the kind that you find in a pool hall. That isn't a cheap one that if you hit it, it shakes. And then I said, in Jesus' name, amen. And so we moved on. About a week and a half later, we're at my daughter Allison's soccer team, and there were like 20 families, 20 moms and dads there. And one of the fathers that I had said hi to, but I didn't know him, Sean, he walks up to me and he says, hi, I'm so-and-so. And I said, I'm JP. And he said, how you doing? I said, I'm doing well. And he said, well, listen, this may sound odd to you. Could you use a pool table? I said, what? He said, yeah.
How gross is this? How disgusting is this? I've never heard, this is the first time I've heard this, honest. When I previewed this video, I did not hear this part. When there's children dying of cancer, leukemia, I mean, and you're saying, praise God, hallelujah, I got a pool table, you know, the ones at professional billiard shops. Sean, how can you allow this? Sean McDowell, I hold you accountable. Sean, it's too late for JP Moreland. He's too dug in, but it's not too late for you. Get out while you still can. Don't get out. Run far away from this Christianity. I mean, I shouldn't even be playing this. This is an offense to those Christians out there who are in pain and suffering right now, who are crying out to God on a daily basis, and nothing happens. Right? How is this not disgusting? I'm thinking about my sister right now, who spent, what was it, 7 years in the worst possible human suffering that one can imagine, being completely paralyzed, feeding tube, but yet feeling pain in every part of your body, taking every drug that man has concocted, put in her bloodstream to try to keep her sane, bed sores, and yet she had running shoes hanging from the ceiling saying that God's going to answer her prayer and heal her someday and she's going to run. And then a guy like JP Moreland says God answered prayer for a pool table. You don't hear how disgusting that is? And if it's true, I mean, your God is disgusting. For not answering the bigger prayer and answering a pool table prayer. Yeah, I'm judging God. If he's real and these stories are real, I'm judging you, Yahweh. You're a schmuck. If you allow that type of suffering and yet give people pool tables, you are a schmuck. I don't believe you exist, and I don't believe this God exists and these stories are true. But if it were true, I can, as a human being, give my opinion.
I empathize with Pine Creek. My own sister died of breast cancer in 2006, and it was very, very difficult. We did everything we could, but she died. Unlike Pine Creek's sister, my sister was not religious. At one point, I decided if I ever get one of these religious or New Age people telling me how the right spiritual or mental attitude would have made a difference, I was going to tell them off. A couple years later, I had a first date at a restaurant with a woman, and she was going on and on about mind over matter, including comments relating to my sister's fate. I finally said to her, "Well, I have an opinion about that, but I don't think you want to hear it." I said that knowing she would insist that I do tell her my opinion. I looked her in the eyes and said, "You're an idiot." She got up and walked out of the restaurant without a word. And I felt very good, not the least bit regretful at what I said. I had defended my sister. Now, I am a theist, not an atheist. I believe in the probability of a general God not tied to any particular religion. And my God is a very mixed entity. He, she, it is in part a severe schmuck also, but not as much a schmuck as the Christian God, who lies when he promises your prayers will be granted. I had the strong feeling that Moreland's concept of, quote, rigorous verification is to track down the miracle claimer, listen to the person's story and their assurances that this actually happened, and there's your rigorous verification. But people's subjective stories do not equal real evidence for a miracle. Reminds me a lot of Mary Baker Eddy's Christian Science book. The whole last section is filled with anecdotes of people getting miraculously healed, but with no objective evidence at all. As people who care about the truth know, the plural of anecdote is not evidence. Here's my conversation with three of the people at the conference. One was a presenter, another maybe the church's pastor or assistant pastor, I'm not sure, and the third a prison ministry pastor. I don't remember exactly which one said what, but I remember what they said. I've heard virtually all these conservative Christian arguments before. A God who has a hell is a cruel God.
Only if no one deserves it.
But no one deserves hell.
Does Adolf Hitler deserve hell?
No.
Why?
Because he lived only one lifetime of evil. He deserves severe punishment, but not never-ending torture. At some point it becomes pointless and just plain cruel to continue torturing a person no matter how bad the person was. They never faced what I just said. They avoided it. They just jumped to other Christian talking points, like people in hell don't want to be with Jesus in heaven. That's not the point. The question is a God who tortures any sentient being endlessly a loving God? And the answer is no, he is not. He is an obscenely cruel God. If a serial murderer was sentenced to death, how would you put him to death? Would you set him on fire? You'd be okay with that, burning him to death?
Well, that's not my job. That's the state's job.
Again, they avoided the issue, which is, are you okay with a murderer being set on fire and burned to death? Never mind being burned continuously forever. They just deflected. Christians are experts at deflection.
God is holy. He cannot abide evil.
What are you talking about? He abides all kinds of natural evil in the world. Let me say something that might shock you. I say God is a bastard. Not just the God you believe in, but also the God that I believe in. He set up a world in which children die of diseases, and people lose their homes to hurricanes and so on. God is a very mixed entity. So when you say he is holy, he cannot abide evil, I said, what are you talking about? He's the author of horrendous evil. And again, they avoided the issue. Saying God is holy and cannot abide human evil is not the point in question. The issue is, how does God specifically deal with human evil? The Christian God tortures not just serial murderers, but simply non-believers endlessly. And that is not a loving thing to do. Punish appropriately and proportionately, and then at some point, poof. That makes sense to me. But torturing forever is insanely cruel. Hell is the elephant in the room that Christians are brainwashed to not face honestly. The Bible is full of immoralities.
The Bible reports immoralities. It doesn't condone them.
I'm well aware of that distinction. I always make that distinction. That's why I focus on immoralities that God specifically condones. For example, your God condones slavery.
No, he doesn't.
Yes, he does. Leviticus 25:44-46. He gives the Hebrews permission to own foreigners as hardcore slaves. He refers to human beings as property.
Many of the slaves were treated well, better than many of the people in the general population. And you were not allowed to mistreat your slaves.
You were allowed to beat them severely.
If they rebelled, there were limits to the number of lashes to be given.
What are human beings doing giving lashes to other human beings? That's not how to deal with people.
Well, this is why the resurrection is so important. You're going to go down all these rabbit trails.
This is not a rabbit trail. It's a fundamental moral issue.
I think God gave us the word on slavery when he gave us the golden rule. If you have slaves, you are not treating others as you would have them treat you.
Yeah, that logic is sound. Yeah, I agree as a general principle. But you're ignoring what the Bible specifically says about slavery and how Jesus gave parables involving slavery with no hint of condemnation at all. It's just the opposite. Jesus assumed slavery was an acceptable, normal part of life.
Paul, in the book of Philemon, clearly opposes slavery.
I disagree. I think Paul is in favor of benevolent slavery. He said, treat your slaves well. He didn't speak out against the institution of slavery. And why should I listen to Paul? He was a male chauvinist. He said wives should be subject to husbands in everything. He was a foul mouth. He was a bigot. Say the Bible says 2 plus 2 equals 5. Would you believe in the Bible then?
No, I wouldn't. That's just it. The Bible is reasonable. It wouldn't say that.
It would. It says 7 equals 5.
Where?
Let me check my notebook. First Chronicles 3:19 to 20. The names here are hard to pronounce, so I'll just say the first letter of the name. The sons of Zerubbabel were M, H, S their sister, and H, O, B, H, and J. 5 in all. It says the sons of Zerubbabel were, it lists 7 names, and then ends with 5 in all. 7 does not equal 5. So you have to give up your religion now because you said you wouldn't believe in a religion that says 2 plus 2 equals 5. And here's the Bible saying 7 equals 5. The prison pastor looked up the passage in the NASB, a word-for-word translation, and said he'd have to study it. There is undoubtedly an explanation. It's not as clear-cut as I think.
This is the NASB version, a word-for-word translation. It does not say 5 in all. It just says 5 at the end. So maybe it means 5 in the sense that there were an additional 5 more, not 5 in all.
I always try to steelman their positions, to look at the issue from their perspective. Maybe, possibly, it does mean 2 sons, a sister, and additionally 5 more. Maybe it's not necessarily absolutely a contradiction. Yet my New King James Version, also a word-for-word translation, says 5 in all. I should have gone down 2 verses to verse 22, where there's less ambiguity, where only 5 sons are listed, yet it says 6. 5 does not equal 6. Yet, again, steel manning, I suppose Christians could say descendants and sons are virtually interchangeable concepts to the Hebrews, so that Shemaiah himself is included in that 6 total with his 5 sons. I note that another verse, 1 Chronicles 25:3 in the American Standard Version, clearly lists 5 sons but says 6, whereas the New American Standard Bible, the revision of that, adds a 6th name, Shammai, with a footnote, so with one Hebrew manuscript. I guess it took until the 20th century for this error to be noticed. I'm not saying a minor math error is a good reason to reject Christianity, but that math errors disprove the doctrine of biblical inerrancy, and that a book so loaded with ambiguity is not to be trusted.
You're picking out one little thing.
What, you want me to pick out 5 things at once? That's how picking out things works, one at a time. I'm not picking out one isolated thing. I'm highlighting one example of an established pattern. There are tons of mathematical discrepancies in the Bible. A son is 2 years older than his father. 500,000 Hebrews are killed in a single battle, more than the total number of Americans killed in World War II, a modern 4-year war. A basin holds twice as much water as it can mathematically hold, etc., etc. Whatever rationalizations you come up with to gloss over these errors, I think a book presenting this many uncorrected errors is not trustworthy.
These lines of descendants are there to point us to the Messiah.
Why would I want to trust anybody who came from the line of David? David was a murderer. He killed a loyal soldier to get his wife.
But he repented. He repented.
Yeah, because he was forced to by Nathan.
No, he was made aware of his crime by Nathan, and he responded.
I'm not saying sincere repentance for an evil deed can't be legitimate. I'm saying a man after God's heart would not commit such a deeply evil deed in the first place.
No one makes the claim that David always did what was right.
The Bible makes the claim that he always did what was right, except in that one case where he had Uriah killed. But David took a census against God's will, which is described as a grievous sin also. The men went on about David doing plenty of other things wrong also, as though that supports what the passage says instead of definitively disproving that passage.
And if you're talking about things David did before the Uriah incident, then you have to discount them too.
What? What? No, the passage says all the days of his life.
The passage says he didn't turn away from anything the Lord commanded. That doesn't mean he never sinned.
That's exactly what it means. Biblically, sinning means disobeying God's commands. Adam and Eve sinned by disobeying God's command.
David never directly disobeyed God's command.
But he did. He murdered, and he took a census against God's command.
You have to read it in context because the Bible even mentions his sins.
I wish I had a nickel for every time a Christian has invoked context as a nebulous general explanation while ignoring the specifics of the passage we're looking at. To me, David is not a man after God's heart. He was a murderer. He was a fornicator. He was a corpse mutilator.
You have to understand things in light of the whole Bible.
So cutting off the limbs of enemy corpses and hanging the bodies up is not turning aside from God? To me, it most certainly is turning aside from God, the real God, as opposed to your barbaric Christian God.
Tell me one archaeological dig in the Middle East that has disproved anything in the Bible. Tell me one, just one.
Archaeologists say the Exodus never happened, as described. There's no evidence found that would support such a long, large migration. He ignored my answer and immediately pressed me for one archaeological disproof of the Bible. Jericho. I read Jericho didn't even exist at the time period it was supposed to have been defeated. Let me make one more point about prophecy. I think biblical prophecy is not miraculous predictions coming true, but New Testament writers going through the Old Testament, combing through it, and just picking out correlations and ignoring context. For example, the Bethlehem prophecy says Jesus is the Messiah predicted back in the Old Testament, but if you check the context, that Messiah was supposed to be a military leader against the Assyrians. Jesus wasn't the military leader.
Jesus is a military leader in Revelation. It talks about him holding a sword.
So Jesus was a military leader.
He will be when he returns, definitely.
But you can see how that's not impressive to me, because that's not fulfilled prophecy. It's just a vague prediction of something in the future. How about the virgin birth prophecy? How can Jesus be a sign unto King Ahaz if he wasn't born until 700 years after Ahaz died? He can't be. That's a false prophecy.
It's a double prophecy. It refers to a person back then, but also to Jesus. It's multiple fulfillments.
Well, then it loses all its persuasiveness if you can just make up new rules as you go. Prophecy has to be specific in order to be impressive, not open to additions whenever necessary. At one point I saw J.P. Moreland walking past the room we were in, And I shouted out, "Oh, hey, there's another guy who's afraid to talk to me on the record."
Oh, you're just trying to goad him. You're trying to bait him.
Yeah, you're right, I am. That's all I got left to do. Jones's talk was all about how evil man is, and that we therefore deserve our troubles. Adam and Eve sinned. We are their offspring. We are no different. We are Adam and Eve. He delineated the numerous horrifying genocides in human history. He said the claim that these genocides were inhuman is false. They were inhumane, but they were not inhuman. They were human, because that is what humans do. That is the nature of humans. Genocides are human, not inhuman. We are all capable of being guards at Auschwitz. He pointed out the legitimacy of Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil regarding Adolf Eichmann, the commonness of evil, how ordinary people are quite willing to go along with evil. We are all, he said, Auschwitz enabled. I despise Jones's negative assessment of human nature. Now, he makes the critically important point that human beings are capable of horrific evil, and that much of what we do is based on self-interest rather than inherent goodness. But the claim that we are all essentially evil, that there are no good hearts, to me, is sick. Sick. We all have our ideas on the degree of human goodness versus human evil in the world. But the claim that we are all essentially evil, I think, says more about his indoctrinated brain and twisted heart than it does about the hearts of most people. Was Oskar Schindler Auschwitz enabled? No, he was not. At one point I noticed a specific instance of his Christian bias in glossing over biblical contradictions. When talking about God's promise to Adam and Eve that they will die if they eat of the fruit, he claimed the Bible doesn't say that they will die that day, but on that day they will now become mortal and eventually die. But Genesis 2:17 says, "For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." It's typical biblical ambiguity. Does God mean literally die that day? Does he mean become mortal that day and eventually die? Does he mean literal death or spiritual death? I expect an alleged book of God to be clear, not constantly ambiguous and open to interpretation. Jones was an entertaining speaker. He had a good joke. He said he'd like to die like his grandfather did, peacefully and in his sleep. Not like the passengers in his car who were screaming. I had tried to get Jones to sit down with me before, but knowing I was a hardcore critic, he was not interested. He said, "Why should I give you a platform for your ideas?" Well, because a taped debate would give you a platform for your ideas also. Isn't that the point of a debate? To get the arguments on the table so people can make up their own minds as to which side has the better arguments. He said he'd be happy to talk to me if I were a sincere seeker, but that all I wanted to do was to argue. To me, that is equivalent to saying, "I'll be happy to talk to you, but not if you disagree with me." In my opinion, if you care about truth, you should be very willing to talk to critics, not just believers, seekers, or those on the fence. Put it this way, 1 Peter 3:15, the biblical basis for apologetics, says, quote, "Always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you." It says always. It says everyone. Apologetics is supposed to mean defending your faith, not just preaching to the choir. And as I guessed he would, Jones cited Jesus' advice to the apostles to leave the critics and the recalcitrant behind. Don't waste time on them. Matthew 10:14. "And whoever will not receive you, nor hear your words, when you depart from that house or city, shake off the dust from your feet." 2 points here. 1, I'm not unwilling to hear their words. I want to hear their words. And 2, back then there were no recording devices, so that Jesus' advice not to waste time with committed critics made some sense. But today, With recording devices in the internet, third parties, the public, can hear the arguments, so it's not a waste of time to engage with hardcore opposition. The point of debate is not to change the mind of the specific person you're debating with, but to influence others. At the end of the conference, I approached Jones for a brief interaction. You say that we're all Auschwitz-enabled. My grandfather was a general in the Nazi army. He started to complain about the treatment of the Jews, and they took his rank away. My grandfather was not Auschwitz-enabled, so you're wrong in saying that we all are.
There might have been various reasons why he didn't go along, but the bottom line is, if he hated people in his heart, he was a murderer. That's all there is to it. So, you have a good day.
I see Christian apologetics as the practice of rightfully embracing valid elements of wisdom in Christian theology, yet automatically at the same time ignoring the underlying immorality of closely related Christian concepts. For example, they focus on the valid idea that human beings should be held accountable for their behavior. Good. Yet they ignore the fundamental injustice of the idea of hell. Example, they focus on the valid idea of loving your neighbor. Good. Yet gloss over the merciless genocides their God orders against neighboring tribes. Example, they focus on their God's command to treat your slaves with kindness. Yet they whitewash their God's underlying sanction for the institution of slavery. That's what they do. They focus on the good stuff, they whitewash the bad stuff. That is Christian apologetics. Here's some other quotes and ideas I've come across about Christian apologetics that I agree with. Let's face it, apologetics was created to make convoluted, sophisticated explanations for things which are intrinsically flawed. It's the practice of answering a question that was not the one asked. They are always going off the relevant aspect of a topic. Apologetics is the practice of their bloviating until you don't remember what the question was. It's an endless series of post hoc rationalizations. A guy named Andy Ferber says apologetics is the practice of telling someone that they're reading it wrong. It's apologetics by gaslight. Here's a quote from one Neil Carter, a former Christian blogger. Apologetics books aren't written for the lost, they're written for the saved. The work of defending the faith requires enormous amounts of self-deception, closing one eye and squinting the other to make sure things look the way they're supposed to look. And finally, here's a quote from Cassidy McGillicuddy, another former Christian blogger. Quote, apologetics is the art of tricking Christians with fancy wordplay into thinking Christianity's claims are actually true. Apologists seek to give their religion's claims a veneer of plausible deniability to make them look less categorically absurd. In the end, the only people apologists can still fool are the ones who really want to be fooled in the first place. Unquote. Here's hoping that Christians will come to realize what many have, that the things they cherish most, love, beauty, hope, meaning, do not have to be grounded in conservative Christian theology. They flourish quite well outside of that distorted extremist worldview. Thanks for watching.